Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. Now, one of the things I have always loved about the horror genre is that even if you're not a big scary movie fan, you can probably find a subgenre that will speak to you and that will have tons of movies that will actually be interesting. Um, Say if you normally like true crime stories, I guarantee you can find some slasher biopics out there that will definitely sort of fill that particular niche. Or if you happen to really enjoy, say, like campy humor, so many subgenres that just sort of focus on B, C, and D horror films made pretty much from the beginning of filmmaking. Like there are huge swaths of fan bases that are absolutely into that. And, no matter how niche your interest, you're probably going to be able to find something. My favorite subgenre is actually all about sentient plant life because there's nothing scarier to me than the whole concept of Mother Nature turning on us. So yeah, I mean, whatever your particular interest is, it's probably a horror movie out there somewhere. So today we're focusing on what I feel is kind of a combo of two subgenres, and that is the supernatural or psychological scary movie. Um, these are movies that sort of play with the line between those two concepts, like, is it a supernatural entity that is haunting these people, or is it all in their heads? Is it a little bit of both? And what's really cool about this particular subgenre is that, of course, you have supernatural elements, you have psychological elements, but you also kind of have that mystery vibe going on at the same time. So you have to play sleuth and you have to figure out what is the real deal. And it's especially effective when you've got a movie that plays between the two genres really, really well. So you're kind of left not being certain what was actually the reality of the situation. Was someone just crazy or were they being haunted? And I love being able to sort of delve into that unsettled feeling. That, I don't know, that's one of the things I really, really like about scary movies is that they can leave you asking questions long after a film is done. So the movies we're looking at today definitely play with that concept a lot. I'm going to try and be fairly vague so I don't, give anything away because like I mentioned, that's kind of the fun of this particular blend of genres is like not really knowing. Um but I will say that these ones make it pretty clear that that's what they're doing from the get-go, making you ask what's actually going on. So, as always, all of these picks are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. And with that, let's jump right into the Rex. Okay, so today's picks are all available via our Canopy service, and the first of those is 2018's The Wind. Man, if you like atmospheric horror films, this one just has one of the creepiest vibes, and it does not let up. So, one of the coolest things about this particular film is that it plays with a really real concept called prairie madness. So, during the uh, era when we were settling the Great West and then the wilds of Canada, there was this phenomenon that was going on where people would move from more cosmopolitan and congested cities to these really fairly barren landscapes, and they would develop this sort of dysphoria where the silence and, well, really the only sound that you would hear is the wind, but like the lack of contact with other people, the isolation, it would cause paranoia, it would cause hallucinations. Um, there there's a ton of both fiction and nonfiction starting from that era that has really never left us. And there were definitely noted situations where this sort of paranoia and panic and fear would lead to situations of suicide, and it was a real situation. And so using that and then turning it into this sort of supernatural or psychological situation is super effective because I mean, you don't know. One of the characters in this film, I would say, is actually the wind itself. The sound editing in this is insane because that wind does not let up and it's pervasive. Like, you don't ever get used to it. I mean, it's something that you always notice. You don't suddenly, halfway through the movie, be like, oh, I forgot that that was happening. No, the wind is always there. So when you get these pockets of silence, it's very apparent. Um, and you really get thrown into the world in which our main character is living, and you start to feel really antsy. It's pretty intense that way. Um, so the basic story of The Wind is we've got a couple that has moved from, I believe, St. Louis to an unsettled homestead. Lizzie is our main character, and her husband Isaac. They are all alone. It's just the two of them, and Lizzie's already starting to feel a little bit of this sort of prairie madness when another couple from another larger city moves to the area. So they at least have that little bit of outside connection. They're not quite so alone. But when the other couple comes, things start to become even more unsettling, where it's no longer really clear what is going on, as far as like, is something sinister invading these homes that they've built for each other? Is something going on that's just in Lizzie's head? And the movie really does play that line very, very well. um there's a lot of drama that goes on between the different couples and the different individuals. Lizzie becomes very close to the young woman who moves next door, and they have this rapport, but there's also this weird sense of unsettling confusion that's going on between them as well. You don't really, is there something wrong with the new neighbor, or is there something wrong with Lizzie, or is there something wrong externally from both of them? Who knows? Um, and that's kind of the off-kilter vibe you get the entire time. And all of that story is again accompanied by that wind, and it is creepy. It is legit very creepy. And I think that's one of the things that is most enjoyable about movies like this, that really sort of force you into those characters' shoes. Like, if you watch this in a dark room by yourself, it's pretty scary. Like, this one doesn't have a ton of jump scares. It's not, one of those movies where it's going to be like terrifying and your things are going to leap out at you. Like, it's the not knowing that is the scariest part of this. And again, accompanied by that soundtrack of wind. It's just, it was really, really a good watch. I really enjoyed that whole atmosphere while the movie was going on. And I did like the way that it left me feeling a little bit off balance by the end. I definitely thought that the payoff was perfect. So if you are looking for something that has that creepy vibe, that it's more of a slow, steady, unnerving feeling from the get-go, rather than like bam, monsters, bam, like murder and violence and scary, bam, bam, bam. Like, if you like that sort of edging into things feeling, this one is definitely one to watch. It was directed by Emma Tammy, who, if you follow horror films, you might know is going to be directing the Five Nights at Freddy's movies. I'm not a big fan of the games, so I'm kind of not the target audience, but I know a lot of my friends who are into the games are really excited to see what they do with the films. I will absolutely watch them, but I'll be coming at it from a very different perspective than someone who's already into the franchise. But I did think it was cool that this director was going to be moving in such a different direction, because I definitely feel like this is nothing like Five Nights at Freddy's at all. So that'll be a really interesting thing to explore. So again, lots of really interesting elements to this one. Some of the horror is based on, of course, the supernatural or psychological, but that tie to real prairie madness is super cool in my opinion. So check it out. Available on Canopy, The Wind. Okay, moving right along to our next pick, and that is 2011's The Awakening. Now, I don't know what it is about an old British manor, but something about that setting just works so well in the horror genre. I mean, even if we're talking about like British comedy, if I see a certain type of countryside British manor, like a chill just runs down my spine. Again, even if we're talking about a comedy, there's something about the look of the buildings, the look of the grounds, even when they're perfectly manicured. Actually, it's even more menacing when they're perfectly manicured because there's something a little bit off-putting's not quite the word, but there's just something a little bit unnerving about that kind of perfection a lot of times. And man, does The Awakening lean into that vibe. Um, the Awakening takes place just a little bit post World War One. We're dealing with a nation that's kind of still wrapped up in the whole concept of spiritualism, and you've got a lot of hypnotism going on, and you're delving into the spirit world and being able to reach between the two. And there are tons of people who are total hoaxers, and then the question of, but what about the ones who maybe can reach into that other realm? Is everybody a con artist? Are ghosts real? Are they not? And it's a real point in history where that line was very blurred for a lot of people. And this particular film really, really does a great job of sort of diving into that era and playing with those questions. Our main character is Florence Cathcart, and she's played by Rebecca Hall, who's always amazing in all of the films that I've seen her in anyway. And her whole reason for existence, she feels, is to debunk these supernatural claims. She goes in and she's like, not real, not real, and she's able to prove it to those who are willing to follow her line of scientific thought. But there are a lot of people, especially at that time, who just felt like she was not qualified to make these claims simply because she was a woman, and there's some of that element in dealing with sexism in general within the film. But more than that, it's just got this really cool old school horror vibe. Like, again, the things that lean into that British scary story setting, this film is all about that. You've got this concept of a woman who already is sort of having difficulty with, rational and logical thought versus the supernatural. And the more things happen and the more she is involved in this particular countryside boarding school that she ends up going to sort of figure out what's happening, the more that line gets blurred for her and for you as a member of the audience. It's like, well, you were pretty certain of these things, and you were unsure, and then every time you think you know exactly where the story is going, there's a little twist and you're like, oh, never mind, I was wrong. Or at least I felt that way anyway. And some of it, I will absolutely admit, there are moments that are pretty predictable, or not predictable, but you see where the trajectory of the story is going. And then there were a couple that I was legitimately like surprised by. I definitely did not see some things coming, and I loved that. I love when it feels like an organic surprise too. It didn't feel like it was out of the blue, because I do hate when screenwriters do a gotcha that is sort of like out of left field, and you're just sort of like, well, that doesn't track with anything that's just come before. No, everything fits. It's just, it fits in this surprising kind of way that still feels organic. And I just think that the writer did a really good job with that, and the performers do an excellent job with that as well. As mentioned, you do have Rebecca Hall in here leading the cast, but you also have Isaac Hempstead Wright playing a character within this, and that was really fun to see him on screen. Isaac Hempstead Wright played Bran in Game of Thrones, if you followed that particular series. So it's nice to see him playing a role that is not Bran, especially Bran in the 8th season. But spoilers, and yeah. different topic entirely. But yes, he does a great job here. Like really, really solid performance. Imelda Staunton, you've just got a cast full of phenomenal performers, and they do a really wonderful job with the characters they're given. So if you're looking for sort of that old school, very, very British story vibe, if you're looking for exceptional acting, and it really, really is exceptionally well acted, if you're looking for something that will definitely keep you guessing and uncertain about the next step, check out The Awakening. It really was an entertaining story, and I think you'll really, really enjoy it. Okay, our final film for this week is 2017's Marrowbone. Freely admit, the only reason that I watched this a few years ago was because Charlie Heaton is in this. And I was going through this phase where I was watching all of the works that the people who were in the Stranger Things cast were a part of. Like, I went through all of David Harbour's. Of course, I'd already seen all of Winona Ryder's things. I was going through the individual teens and then the kids. Like, and they found this, and I wasn't at first. I was like, I don't know any of these people except for Heaton, and I don't really know him as an actor either. I'm so glad I watched this because this one was really, really well done. You will definitely recognize several of these cast members. It's actually a very, very well performed film. You've got, of course, Charlie Heaton plays one of the characters, but you've got George McKay, you've got Anya Taylor-Joy, who is phenomenal. Like, I am such a huge fan of hers right now. I've loved everything I've seen her in, with the exception of the Emma adaptation. I did not enjoy the Emma adaptation she was in. My bad. But other than that, excellent, excellent actress. And she wasn't bad in Emma. It was just a terrible adaptation. Mia Goth, who is exceptional in the recent horror films X, and then it's sort of like almost simultaneously released, but not quite, Pearl, a prequel. Like, I'd not seen her in much besides this Marrowbone, but she was excellent in those two movies, and I strongly recommend both of those as well. And you've got a couple other actors you will definitely recognize, even if you only peripherally follow like character performances and whatnot. But the cast is really, really solid, and the story does an excellent job of playing, again, that line between supernatural or psychological. So this one's a hard one to describe a lot of without giving certain things away. I will say there's a big question of what's in the attic or who's in the attic. What is going on with the attic? And you really don't necessarily get a good sense of exactly whether or not it is a supernatural thing or it's just in all of their heads or what exactly is going on. This one is an excellent relationship drama as well. Seeing the different characters interact with each other is, I would say like the big meat of this story, and it really is this family drama that just happens to have some wicked, creepy elements going on at the same time. And I love that too. Like, I love that this is one of those films I think that you could absolutely show someone who is not a horror fan, that is just looking for well acted, sort of, but well acted, that doesn't mind that sort of vaguely creepy vibe, because it is creepy. It's definitely very, very creepy. And when a movie can speak to an audience that isn't necessarily, for an audience it's not necessarily designed for, I think that means that film has been very well done. I'm a scary movie fan. I'm predisposed to liking certain things about films when they have elements of scary movies that I like. I'm way more forgiving about some things and way less forgiving about others within the genre, but like there's certain like hit points for me that I'm like, oh, it did that, yay. And this one, like I said, I think even if you aren't someone who enjoys this genre, I think you can definitely get into it, and you can definitely dive into these characters, because with the relationships being the big forward thrust of the story, sometimes the supernatural and the psychological elements almost go by the wayside, and you're really just focused on the people you're seeing on screen at the moment and how they're interacting and how that relationship is shifting or changing or whatever. I would say if you're looking for something like that, this one is absolutely, that should absolutely go to the top of your list. I think that this one is a little bit more predictable than the other two that I was talking about before, but it doesn't make it less enjoyable. I definitely don't feel like I was disappointed to discover like some of my guesses were accurate. So that's another thing. Like if you're looking to be completely surprised and shocked, this one might not be your thing. But if you're looking for a storyline that makes sense with its twists and turns, because like even when you're talking about things like Agatha Christie, you know, even if you guessed what the little twist was, it doesn't make it less of a phenomenally well-crafted tale. I'm not comparing Marrowbone to Agatha Christie, of course not, but I would say like that similar thought process with this particular storyline. Just because you might predict some of the elements doesn't make it a negative experience. So again, if you're looking for well acted, well written, just in general really good relationship kind of storyline that also happens to be real scary in parts and definitely creepy, check out 2017's Marrowbone. It, like all the other picks, are available on Canopy. It's a must watch. Okay, so that is it for this week's supernatural or psychological episode. If you have recommendations that would fall under that category, please, please, please comment and share those below. If you have suggestions for themes you'd like to see in the future, definitely share those. I absolutely want help with that. Next week is going to be another horror-themed week. Sorry for people who are not horror fans. But I do try and pick films that will work for people even if they don't enjoy this particular genre. And for those who do, there'll be plenty more fun to come. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this episode. As always, thank you so, so much for joining me. Had such a good time putting this list together. Definitely looking forward to next week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!